What if I told you that the one thing stopping you from creating something great is your own good taste? I'm talking about that crystal clear vision you have in your head. You know what a masterpiece looks like. You can see the perfect video, the perfect painting, the perfect business plan in your mind's eye. And that is exactly why you're failing. You are terrified of producing anything less than that perfect vision. That fear of making a bad first draft, of creating something mediocre, keeps you paralyzed. You're left with a folder full of abandoned projects, a desktop cluttered with Final V1, and that familiar, sinking feeling of failure. You're not untalented. You're not lazy. You've just been tricked into believing that you must think your way to a masterpiece. In the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you a simple story about an old pottery master and her 2 final apprentices. This story holds the secret to unlocking your creative power, not by thinking better, but by working differently. It's a quiet truth that separates the amateurs from the masters, and it might just be the one you've been waiting for. Master Tamsin was one of the most revered potters in the world. Her work was displayed in museums and sought after by collectors, yet she lived and worked in a simple, dusty studio, surrounded by the smell of wet earth and wood smoke. To be her apprentice was the highest honor, a journey of discipline and dedication. After years of rigorous training, only 2 apprentices remained, Elias and Mara. Both were exceptionally talented. Both were fiercely dedicated, but they were very different in their approach. The time had finally come for their final test, the one that would determine if they could leave the studio as masters in their own right. Tamsin led them to the kiln room, a space usually filled with the intense heat of firing. Today, it was cool and quiet. In the center of the room sat a mountain of fresh, wet clay, gleaming under a single shaft of light. She looked at her 2 students, her eyes calm and unreadable. "Your final test begins now," she said, her voice echoing softly in the chamber. She turned to Elias. "Elias, you will be graded on quality. At the end of 30 days, you must present me with 1 single, perfect pot." Elias nodded, his mind already racing. He imagined a magnificent vase, a form so elegant it seemed to defy gravity, with a glaze so perfect it looked like a captured sunset. This was his chance to prove his genius, to create the single piece that would define him. Tamsin then turned to Mara. "Mara, you will be graded on quantity. At the end of 30 days, you must present me with 100 pounds of finished, fired pots." Mara looked at the enormous mountain of clay, then back at the master, her expression steady. She simply said, "Yes, Tamsin." And so they began. Elias immediately claimed the quiet, sunlit corner of the studio. But he didn't touch the clay, not for the first 3 days. He sat and sketched, filling page after page with intricate designs. He read ancient books on glazing techniques, researching rare minerals and firing methods. He was planning his masterpiece, but in reality, he was paralyzed by the idea of perfection. When he finally did start working with the clay, the process was tense and agonizing. He centered the clay on the wheel, and if it wobbled even slightly, he'd sigh in frustration, smash the clay down, and start over. His side of the studio remained clean and quiet, but it was filled with the ghosts of failed attempts, dozens of crumpled drawings, and a single, untouched lump of clay. He was trying to create perfection from his mind. On the other side of the studio, Mara's corner was a total mess. The moment Tamsin had left the room, Mara had grabbed a huge piece of clay, thrown it on the wheel, and just started. Her first pot was terrible. It was thick, hopelessly lopsided, and it collapsed on the wheel before she could even shape it. She sighed, scraped it up, and threw it into a bucket she labeled finished. Then she immediately grabbed more clay. Her first 10 pots were awful. Her next 20 were clumsy and crude. But with every single failure, with every pot that slumped or cracked, she was learning. She learned the feel of the clay, discovering exactly how much water it needed to stay pliable. She learned how to fix a wobbly rim, not by starting over in a fit of anger, but by gently working with the floor, turning it into part of the design. Her hands were perpetually caked in mud, her face streaked with sweat and dried clay. She wasn't thinking about a masterpiece. She was just thinking about making the next pot. Halfway through the month, Elias, frustrated with a design that looked perfect on paper but wouldn't work in reality, glanced over at Mara's finished shelf. It was piled high with lopsided, ugly experimental junk. "You're just making junk," he said, his voice laced with bitterness and a hint of condescension. Mara, wiping sweat from her brow, didn't even look up from her spinning wheel. "Maybe," she said, her voice steady, "but I just learned how to make a perfect handle." "What did you learn today?" Elias had no answer. He went back to his sketches, to his perfect, untouched idea. The final day arrived. Master Tamsin entered the quiet studio, the air thick with anticipation. Elias, pale and nervous, stood beside a single pedestal. On it sat his pot. He had finished it. It was, by all technical measures, perfect. The shape was flawlessly symmetrical. The glaze was an even, deep cobalt, without a single imperfection. It was exactly what he had planned. "It is a good pot, Elias," Tamsin said, nodding slowly. "You are a fine craftsman." Elias felt a small, fleeting swell of pride. Then Tamsin turned to Mara. Mara gestured to her side of the studio. In the back was a massive pile, the graveyard, as she called it, of her first 80 attempts. But on the tables in the front were her final 20 pots. They were not just good, they were alive. Some were delicate and thin as eggshells. Others were strong, bold, and earthy. You could see the confidence in every curve, the history of her journey in their forms. They were beautiful, and in total, they weighed 100 pounds. Tamsin walked over and picked up one of the final pots, a simple, elegant teacup that fit perfectly in her hand. She held it up to the light, a small smile touching her lips. "Elias," the master said, her voice soft but clear, "you have made one perfect pot, but you have learned very little." She then turned to Mara, her eyes now full of warmth. "You have made 100 mistakes, and in doing so, you have learned the art. You have become a potter." Elias had spent his month agonizing over the idea of perfection, so terrified of making a mistake that he barely learned a thing. Mara had spent her month making mistakes. She had found a secret. She had found quality through the process of quantity. What is the lesson for us here today? We believe that we must think our way to a masterpiece. We believe that if we just plan enough, research enough, and wait for that perfect divine moment of inspiration, we will create something great. But the truth is, we must work our way there. First, give yourself permission to make junk. The only thing that separates a master from a beginner is that the master has failed more times than the beginner has ever tried. You cannot edit a blank page. You cannot fix an idea that's still locked in your head. The goal of a first draft is not to be good. The goal of a first draft is simply to exist. Second, stop confusing planning with progress. Reading about your craft, watching videos, and sketching ideas feels like productive work, but it's often a form of hiding. The real work, the real learning, only happens in the doing. It happens when your hands are in the mud, when you're facing the challenges of the material itself. And finally, remember this: the path to quality is paved with quantity. You don't get good at something by thinking about it. You get good by doing it. Again and again and again. The genius you admire in others is not the result of a single brilliant idea. It is the visible result of 1,000 invisible, boring, and failed attempts. Stop waiting to be inspired. Stop trying to be a genius. Just show up. Do the work. Make the next pot. Then make the one after that. That is how great things are truly built. Not by a flash of inspiration, but by the steady, quiet, and unstoppable power of doing the work. I hope you found value in this story. If you did, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might be stuck in the planning phase. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. We will meet again.